It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Erich Osterberg, a climate scientist, professor at Dartmouth College, where he studies Earth's climate history using ice cores drilled from some of the most remote places on the planet, including Greenland and high mountain glaciers in Alaska. His research helps us to understand not only how climate has changed in the past, but what those changes mean for communities today and for our future, our students and youth will inherit. I'm going to go ahead and move to this. Beyond the lab and the field, Dr. Osterberg has a family, including his 2 boys with his wife Laura in New Hampshire. When not analyzing ice cores, you can find him on the local ski hill or swimming pool cheering on his kids. Erich is known for his consistent collaboration with educators and community groups, as well as his ability to communicate complex ideas with clarity and optimism. He will be running 2 breakouts later today on understanding proxy data. Today he'll share a perspective that feels especially meaningful for all of us who work with young people every day. In his keynote, Why I'm Hopeful, Dr. Osterberg will reflect on what the science tells us, what he has witnessed in the field, and why, despite the challenges, he remains optimistic about our collective ability to shape a better climate future. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Erich Osterberg.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to give another shout out to Bill and Louise, please. Thank you so much, Bill. They're the reason I'm here. They're doing such incredible work, bringing together scientists and other educators to really focus on how we can just like boost up STEM and hope about climate change with the next generation. So that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. I'm going to talk about why I'm hopeful. And I want to start off just by making clear like what I'm not saying. Okay, I am not a climate denier by any stretch of the imagination. I've dedicated my entire career to studying climate change, and I understand the magnitude and the complexity of this challenge. And I'm also not saying like everything's going to be okay. Like there's not going to be any problems, because we know they're already not okay in a lot of places, right? Like we're already experiencing the effects of climate change. We have been for a couple of decades, and those effects are going to continue. So I'm not saying everything's going to be okay. I think the vibe I'm going for here is like, we can do this, okay? What I talk to my students about is, we broke this, we can fix this, we can do this. And I want to share with you 5 reasons why I am hopeful that we can do this. But I want to start out just by introducing myself to you as a scientist and the kind of science that I do. You just heard I'm an ice core scientist. Got a lot of ice core scientists here today. It's really amazing seeing current and former grad students, colleagues I've been working with for decades, all gathered here today to work with all of you. And so I want to give you a little flavor of what like ice core science looks like. All right, so I'm going to take you to the mountains of central Alaska, the Alaska Range in Denali National Park, to the top of a mountain called Mount Hunter, where we've been doing research since about 2007, almost every year. And this is a picture of our summit camp where we do most of our research, super high and remote. It's so high that we actually have to get acclimatized before we go there. So we climb up the mountain on our skis to get acclimatized, and we go back to base camp, and we can use a helicopter then to go from base camp straight up to our mountaintop camp, where we're going to spend about 2 months doing research, camping out in the glacier. And this is what that camp looks like. You can see our drilling tent is that dome, our kitchen tent is the big one, and then our smaller sleeping tents. You can see we got solar panels and wind vanes there to power everything with renewable energy. And then we start drilling the core, and this is what the drill looks like. We're basically collecting a coffee can diameter cylinder of ice, 700 to 1,000 feet down through the whole glacier. And it comes up in 3-foot sections at a time like this. And so we just keep sending the drill back down the same hole over and over and over again for 6 to 8 weeks to drill these 700 to 1,000 feet of ice. And we pack them into these insulated boxes. The helicopter brings the boxes down back to base camp, where we load them up onto ski planes. This is a glacier runway, right? This is just glacier, and these planes have skis on them. We load the boxes into the ski planes. The ski planes take them to a local town of Talkeetna, Alaska, where they get loaded onto a freezer truck. And then that freezer truck drives all the way from Alaska to New Hampshire so that we can analyze the ice cores. It's an incredible amount of work, effort, money to try and get these ice cores so that we can analyze them and understand climate change. Once we get them to the lab, you can see one of my students here, Karina. She's cut this core open and she's laying it on a table with light underneath it. You turn the lights off in the room and you can really see nicely some of the layering in the ice core here. Just with your eyes, right? So she's doing a very first analysis of the core. And then we bring it up to our ice core lab, where just like imagine the craziest like scientific lab you have in your mind with like wires and tubes and bubbles everywhere and like Rube Goldberg kind of stuff, right? And that's pretty much how it is. And one of the guys who's like created this is here in the audience, Jacob, doing a couple of our breakout sessions today. So the whole point of this is just to melt the ice super cleanly so we get this crazy clean drop of water that we can collect in a really, really clean bottle, and then we can analyze the chemistry of the ice core, all the stuff that falls out of the atmosphere onto the glacier. We can measure if we use this Rube Goldberg type system and then put it into our machine. All right, so the first reason I'm hopeful is that let's stick with the science here. There is some good news from the science, and the good news generally doesn't get much press, right? It doesn't get a lot of clicks to say, actually things aren't quite as bad as we feared they were, right? The science has showed us some good news. So let's tell you one good news story. I'm gonna take you now to northwest Greenland, an area near Thule Air Force Base, which was in the news in the last year, when our vice president visited. And I'm gonna take you to check out this lake. This is a lake right against the ice sheet here. This is a huge lake. It's really difficult to get scale in Greenland because there's no buildings, no trees. It's like a moonscape. It's just rock. This lake is 2 miles in diameter. So you're looking down on this lake from a helicopter as we're flying into camp. And so that's the lake circled up there. And we were flying past it to go to our camp at a different lake, where in this case we were actually going to go out in the lake and collect sediment cores, collect mud cores from the bottom of the lake to study climate change that way. And we were studying the ice from the glacier earlier. So let's go back to this lake. This is what this lake looked like as we were helicoptering into camp on August 5th, 2012. And when we were at camp, we had to have people awake all night. We were taking turns on watch because there are polar bears in this area. And if there's a polar bear coming, we gotta clear out of there, right? Like, we do not wanna interact with the polar bears. These are incredible protected animals. And we've got food in our camp. So we wanted to make sure we were free of polar bears. So we would take turns staying up for like 2 hours all night. And the next morning on like August 12th or 13th, we were sitting around breakfast and we were all talking about this weird noise we heard in the middle of the night. It sounded like there was a river near our camp, but there is no river near our camp. We were just talking about it. It was this really strange noise. Anyway, a couple days later, we're flying to another camp. And this is what that lake looked like. This lake had catastrophically drained in the matter probably of several hours. Again, scale is difficult here. This two-tone here, that's the shoreline where the lake used to be. This is over 120 feet tall. So this is like a 20-story building, okay? These blocks of ice here that have now collapsed into the empty or almost empty lake basin here, these are like 5-story buildings. These are massive. And this happened so quickly. So this is before, and you can see that after. So that two-tone was right here. Okay? So things were really dramatically changing, incredibly fast. We just happened to be nearby when this happened. The sound of the rushing water was literally all of the water in this lake rushing out to the ocean. So the ocean is just off the top of the screen here. And you can see that not only did the lake drain, but you see this giant collapse feature here in the glacier. This thing is huge. There used to be water underneath this, buoying it up, and then the water wormed its way under the ice, found its way to the ocean, and this whole thing collapsed down, again, in a matter of hours. And we're used to thinking about glaciers as moving, you know, at glacier speed, really slowly. Like glacial is a synonym for really slow. But what we can see is that when you mix glacier ice with liquid water, things can happen really, really quickly. And this was just such a key take home for me from this experience. And all that water is going into the ocean, and we know that that's raising sea level, right? So here's sea level rise over the past century or so, and you can see that we've risen sea level by about 9 inches in that time. And I had one grad student, Gabe Lewis, who came up with this incredible analogy for how much ice is going from Greenland into the ocean. I want you to imagine a herd of African elephants. Think about how many elephants would it take to equal the amount of mass going into the ocean just for melting ice in Greenland. Turns out the answer is 2,000 elephants every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, all year long. Just picture that in your mind. A herd of 2,000 elephants charging into the ocean every second, all year long. And that's just Greenland, right? If we had the mountain glaciers, you double that, 4,000 elephants a second. And so I can hear what you're saying. Where's the good news here? You're kind of bumming me out here. It's only 8:26 here, and we're getting a little down. So the good news is, if we look out to the future, you've probably seen images like this of where sea level or maybe temperature is going to go in the next century. And by 2100, under low CO2, middle CO2, and high CO2. And this is from the last IPCC report just a few years ago, and check out this dotted line. This dotted line was super scary. Okay? This dotted line said that by the end of this century, we could be looking at 5 or 6 feet of sea level rise, instead of something more like 2 to 3 feet, even under high CO2 scenarios. Turns out, that is not gonna happen. And that is really freaking good news. And this was actually came out of a research group that's just down the hall from me at Dartmouth, Matthew Morlahan and his group. And what they showed is that the mechanism by which this was hypothesized turns out not to be the way we thought. Okay, so we don't actually have to worry about that. And why does this matter? I mean, towns up where we are in the Northeast, towns were preparing for that 5 or 6 feet, right? And that's a massive amount of change in investment and infrastructure in order to deal with 6 feet of sea level rise in the next 70, 80 years, right? Now, 2 feet of sea level rise, again, I'm not saying everything's gonna be okay, but it's not 5, 6 feet. That is really good news. And this got like 0 press. This got like 0 press, just one little thing. Most basically, Dartmouth put out a press release saying, actually, that Doomsday Glacier we're talking about down in Antarctica, I'm sure you've heard about that in the news, not nearly as bad as we thought. All right, number 2, and this one I think is really where the meat is. We actually have all the solutions we need to deal with climate change. It is not the case that we're like, oh man, we got this really complex issue and we don't know what to do. We know exactly what to do. And we have the solutions, and the solutions are awesome. It's not the case where the medicine is worse than the disease. Okay? The solutions are awesome. So let's dig into this. If you take all the solutions that are in the IPCC reports, all the ways that we could reduce emissions and boil them on down to like their true nuggets, there's just a few things that all of those plans have in common. Number 1, we have to electrify everything we can. We have to stop like doing internal combustion. We have to stop burning fossil fuels in the little small areas. I mean, we have to stop burning fossil fuels altogether. But we have to electrify everything we can. So let's just take home heating. I've got an oil burner in my house in the basement in New Hampshire. It gets really cold in New Hampshire like it does here. But we can replace that with an electric heat pump heating system, which my wife and I have now done. Bonus, now we don't just have heat in the winter, we also have air conditioning in the summer. EVs, right? EVs have exploded, have completely exploded. So we can take our transportation system and completely electrify it. And have you guys driven one of these EVs? Right? So like heat pumps are awesome. EVs are amazing. You drive an EV, you feel like you're driving a spaceship. I'm telling you, it's incredible. It's not like driving a car, a regular car. And you know all those things you spend your money on at the garage, like oil changes, God forbid an oil leak, God forbid a transmission issue. None of those things happen in an EV because they don't have an engine. They have an electric motor instead. So EVs are really cool, and they're exploding around the world. So if we go back just to 2020, remember COVID? Wasn't that long ago, right? 2020, COVID, 2% of vehicle sales in the US, 2% were EVs. In China, it was just under 6%. We go just a few years beyond that, 2024, US jumps to 11%, China jumps to 40%. Look, up in Scandinavia, there are places where basically every car that's being sold now is an EV. This technology is here to stay. Like, it doesn't matter what anybody tries to do to keep the internal combustion engine, it's going the way of the dodo here. We're switching to EVs. And this concept that EVs have to be $60,000, $80,000 is just not the case, okay? Number 2 selling car in China, $15,000 EV. And so the second thing, once you've electrified everything you possibly can, then you make sure that that electricity is coming from low carbon sources, coming from renewable sources. And we've already seen this explosion of solar power, right? In the United States, in Europe, and check out China. We love to bash on China. We love to bash on just like how awful they are for the climate and the environment. They are whooping our butts. They are whooping our butts in putting out this new renewable technology. And I think about this all the time. I teach Earth history, it's one of the classes I teach. It may or may not be known as Rocks for Jocks at Dartmouth. But if I can get like 120 jocks to care about the Earth, like, yes, 100%, let's do it. But nature invented photosynthesis somewhere around 3 billion years ago, right? Using the power of the sun has worked for nature for 3 billion years. I think we can figure out how to make it work too. And then wind power. Wind power is also exploding. Note again, holy moly, China, right? And we can think about how wind power in the last couple of years has become politicized. It's become like a red versus blue kind of issue for some reason. Where we're doing wind power in the United States, these are not like democratic bastions. Texas, 3 times more wind power than any other state. Texas has more wind power than almost every other country in the world, except for China and Germany and the United States. Okay? So Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Iowa's number 2. And then Illinois, number 5. Nice job, Illinois. Okay, so these are not just like Massachusetts, New York, and California. They're doing this because you can make a lot of money doing this. And this is probably the most important slide in this entire show. This like incredible explosion of renewable energy has not primarily been driven by people who want to fix the climate. It has not been primarily driven by the idea that we need to reduce carbon emissions. It's been driven by the fact that renewable energy is now the cheapest form of new grid-scale energy to deploy. It's just cheaper. You can save money doing it, right? Like, Obama did not kill coal. Biden did not kill coal. Trump can't save coal. It's just too damn expensive. Not to mention, we've got all these incredible side benefits of what happens when we deploy these solutions. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels, estimated to kill about 5 million people a year. So we can reduce our carbon emissions, save some money, and save some millions of lives in the process by reducing the air pollution associated with this. Not to mention the fact that these oil refineries tend to be located closer to black and brown communities in this country than white communities. So we can address some systemic racial injustices while we're also fixing the climate system. Again, these solutions are awesome. And then the third thing, so first electrify everything, then get your power from low carbon sources. The third thing is we really got to stop like burning everything. I heard Bill McKibben say this a few years ago. He said, we just got to stop burning everything. Like, why do we burn anything anymore? And I was like, you know, Bill, I love you. I'm a mid-Hillary grad. I love Bill. It's like, that seems a little out there for me. I'd totally come around to that. Like, why are we burning anything anymore? We don't need to. Particularly the rainforests. 20% of our greenhouse gases comes from burning the rainforests. And, you know, I teach Earth history, as I mentioned, like, another crisis that we have right now is a biodiversity and extinction crisis. And so again, co-benefits here. We can save the climate system, we can reduce carbon emissions, and we can address some of our crisis and species extinctions. And we gotta do this fast, right? We gotta get moving. Because quick quiz here. How much have U.S. carbon emissions gone up since 2006? Show of hands. Who thinks A? Ooh, we got a couple optimists. I love the optimists. Who thinks B? C? And D? That's generally what I tend to see. Right? Somewhere around here is what most of my classrooms assume as well. The answer is A. Yes, optimists. This is a hope talk. This is a hope talk. Come on, guys. Our students, and most of us, don't know this. U.S. emissions peaked around 2007. U.S. emissions have been going down our students' entire lives. Okay? They think we're on this runaway train. Emissions have been going down. Emissions in Europe have been going down almost my entire life. Don't do the math. Okay? A really long time. Like a gray hair kind of long time. So that brings me to why I'm hopeful number 3, is that we're probably doing better than you fear. Maybe doing better than you think. But we're probably doing better than you fear. As we think about, like, as a global community, as a country, how are we doing, like, towards these really ambitious targets of, say, net zero at 2050, or the Paris targets, right? How are we doing? We're probably doing better than you fear. So, again, you've probably seen plots like this, where we can look out to the future, to the rest of this century, and we can think about how temperatures are going to change. The axis here is actually carbon emissions, not temperature, but you can see the temperatures associated with a high CO2 future, a mid CO2 future, and a low CO2 future. And then down here, these are both in line with our so-called Paris Accord targets. And so we even have this phrase that we like to use, right? Business as usual. That the business as usual high CO2, that's the runaway train that we're on. And you all think that. You just showed me with your quiz. Our students all think that. We're on this runaway train. And the answer is, we are not. That is not business as usual anymore. And it's really important because that was business as usual when we were all in our students' place. When we were in high school, in college, in the 90s, in the 80s, whenever we were there, we were on that runaway train. That was business as usual back then. But a lot has happened in the last 20 to 25 years, and we are no longer on that runaway train. This is now business as usual. In fact, I'm on this like crusade with my colleagues, my climate science colleagues. IPCC has all these different scenarios, and we put them into our models to see, how much temperature change or how much the storms change. I don't even think we should be publishing about this anymore. Why are we publishing these? This is not a realistic future anymore. Thank goodness. That's great news. We should only be publishing about these different futures. And yet, still, even in my research group up until a few years ago, we were publishing papers that were using these scenarios. And I don't think we should anymore, because it's reinforcing this notion that we're on this runaway train, that this is business as usual. So when I talk to my students about this, they think we're here, they think we're here, and they know we gotta get here, and that looks impossible, right? To get from the red curves here to the green and blue, that looks impossible. That looks hopeless. That looks hopeless. That is what I fear the most in our students' generation. If they lose hope, that scares me more than anything. And the truth is, we were on that runaway train. We did a lot of work to get here, and we're halfway to where we need to go. And frankly, we weren't even really trying all that hard to get here, now were we? Right? We weren't even really trying all that hard. And we were able to go from here to here. We can do this. We can do this. Number 4, we can learn ways to reduce these impacts that are already here. Okay, we are not going to be able to stop all of the impacts of climate change, we know that. But we can learn to change our ways in society to actually reduce those impacts, to benefit ourselves, despite the fact that some of these climate changes we can't stop. And I want to tell you a story. Again, it starts with some bad news, but we'll get to the good news, I promise. You should know that by now. 2003, massive heat wave across Western Europe. Ironically, there was a big ice core conference in Italy during this heat wave. And all like the ice core scientists from around the world were there sweltering in temperatures over 100 degrees. What was hit worse was France. Temperatures were extremely high in France, and over 70,000 people died during this heat wave across Western Europe. 70,000 people. And I know we're unfortunately used to crazy statistics like this after COVID, right? But just let that sink in, right? The number of people who were impacted, were killed by this event. And then France was like, we're not doing this again. We are not doing this again. We're gonna learn from this. And so we had that event in 2003, and then there was an even worse heat wave in France in 2019, but they had only 10% of the deaths that they had in 2003. 10%, they were able to cut the death rate by 90%. So how did they do it? This was not like some revolutionary change. What they did was they had started a national heat wave plan. They started a big ad campaign informing people, actually, heat kills. These are the things to look out for. These are the people who need to be careful. They started the neighbors, like neighbors knowing neighbors. Who in your community is most at risk? So when a heat wave comes, you actually physically go and check on them in person, or physically go and bring them to a cooling shelter. Oh, and we're gonna now require communities, and require senior homes to have cooling areas. And we're going to improve training of both municipal workers and our emergency responders so that we understand the risk that's coming from heat. None of this is like revolutionary, and they cut the deaths by 90%. And then an even worse heat wave happened in 2022. And this is a paper, a peer-reviewed publication, came out in Nature Medicine. And on the left here, I'm showing you the temperature anomaly, or the authors are showing you the temperature anomaly. And so these darkest colors, these are where the temperature anomaly was the hottest. This is where the heat wave was the worst. I want you to contrast this image on the left with this image on the right, which shows where the deaths per capita were the highest. So you can see that the heat wave was the worst in Spain, and France, and Italy. The deaths were really bad in Spain and Italy, not so bad in France. Why? Because they had done all these things. And Spain and Italy were slower to do these things. They've now learned these lessons, and they're starting to implement these things. But this shows you right here, like we can change our ways and make a real difference, make a real impact on people's lives, actually save people's lives. All right, and last, and I want to make sure we have time for some questions here. Last reason why I'm hopeful is that I am inspired literally every day by our students, by this next generation. They are rolling up their sleeves. They have ways of thinking about this problem that are different from how I was approaching this problem, not just when I was a kid, not just when I was their age, but how I was approaching it before really working with them. They have an equity lens to absolutely everything, which is incredible. They have an equity lens the way that my generation maybe had sort of a economic lens to everything. Everything we do is like, well, how much is that going to cost? Well, we could do this, but what about, I got to save the, right, the economic lens sort of to any decision we made. They have that lens, but for equity and for justice. So as they're thinking about these solutions, they're doing it all through that equity lens, and it's really inspiring. We in my research group have come to this mantra: given what is, what's ours to do? And I love this. I love this for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to tell you a few of them. First of all, given what is, it forces you to take a moment and pause and assess what is the situation? What is going on? And then, what's ours to do? And there's so much wrapped up in this one little phrase. First of all, it acknowledges you can't do it all. I think sometimes our young people feel overwhelmed because they're like, oh my God, there's so much to do. I gotta do it all. I gotta do it all. You don't have to do it all. There's part of it that's yours to do. Also, it assumes that there's always something to do. It assumes that there's always something to do. Further, it allows this to evolve through time. What's mine to do as a faculty member at Dartmouth College, who's in his late 40s, is different from what's my students to do as students at Dartmouth College, which is different from what's my wife's to do as a pediatrician in New Hampshire. It's different from what's my kids to do as teenagers in middle and high school. And what's mine to do, if I just put it on myself now, is different from what was mine to do 10 years ago and what's going to be mine to do in 10 years or in 20 years. So it always changes, and that's okay. But it allows you to say, what is mine to do? And so I'm going to give you an example of one of the ways I answered that question. What is mine to do as a college professor in his late 40s who has tenure? That was part of what was mine to do. It was like, hey, I've got some freedom here. Like, I don't have to worry about my job right now. I can put my neck out there and do something a little different. And so we created a service learning class where we are partnering students with nonprofit orgs, towns, even small businesses in our community that had some sort of challenge related to climate change, some climate resilience challenge they wanted help with, and they specifically wanted help from the students. And so we had like 20 students, we had lots of support, we even had money. So these organizations actually put in proposals, and there was $5,000 for them. If they were selected, we had 13 organizations apply, we chose 4 of them, and we actually gave them $5,000 each for their time, to respect the fact that they were spending their time to help teach our students, and further actually implement the project to make sure that we could actually do something. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Our local town of Hanover has installed a whole bunch of solar panels. They've got new solar farms. One of the challenges with solar power is that it collects too much energy in the day, too much meaning more than we need when the sun's out, and they don't collect any energy in the night, and we do need energy at night. So how do we deal with that? Well, one of our local towns has a ski area in it, a very small ski area, and they thought, what if we turned the ski area into a battery? What if we turned the ski area into a battery using the snowmaking infrastructure that's already there? During the day, when we have extra solar power, we can pump water from a lower reservoir, which we already have for the snowmaking, pump water all the way up to the top of the hill, using that extra electricity in the day. And then at night, when we need it, we can release that water through turbines to produce electricity. Oh, and this lodge, the ski lodge, can now become a community shelter in case of a storm or in case of loss of power. And this would help make this ski area sort of elevate as a pillar of the community. And it really is in this really, really small rural town. Very cool project. I'll give you another example. Up in the Northeast where we are in New Hampshire and Vermont, we've had this massive problem with river flooding. We've seen a really dramatic increase in extreme rainfall that's causing more river flooding. And there was this community here in Woodstock, Vermont. This is a mobile home community that was impacted by floods 3 times in the last 15 years. So these units here right along the river were underwater 3 times in the last 15 years. And so students were able to work with a local nonprofit to come up with a short-term plan. What are you going to do if the flood comes this summer? Literally, how are you going to get out and be safe? A medium-term plan to actually elevate some of these so that the medium floods didn't affect this community, and come up with a long-term plan for how we might actually relocate this entire community, but keep them together because they are a community, they're neighbors, they want to stay together, they just need to be safe. So again, really, really inspiring work done by students. So I'm going to leave it there. Here's a recap of why I am hopeful. There is some good news out there, despite what the clickbait news decides to ignore. It's not all bad news in the science. We have all the solutions we need, and the solutions are awesome. We're probably doing better than you fear. We can actually reduce these impacts by just some pretty simple things, and I'm inspired every day by our students. So thank you.
At this time, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. We have a little bit of time, probably about 10 minutes, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Osterberg.
And you can ask me about anything. Doesn't have to be the stuff I was talking about. You've got a burning climate question, go for it.
Yeah, I'll come to you first.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, like, since it's pretty obvious now, just looking at the news and being alive the last 10 years, can you tell us how you still use ice cores? Why is that so important? Other than proving, obviously, that we are experiencing this moment of climate change.
It's an amazing question. Are there any National Science Foundation program managers in the room? You got it. It's like a cop. You got to tell me if you are. All right. I will say part of how I answer, given what's mine to do, is I am pivoting more and more of my research to local climate resilience, particularly flooding, as opposed to the ice core work. I still do the ice core work because, frankly, the students are super interested in it, and there are still so many important questions to answer. Like, so many important questions to answer. But like that top level, I think what you're getting at, like the top level take-home message of like, okay, we got a problem, right? Like I feel like the first 20 years of my career was like, we got a problem. Everybody wake up, we got a problem. And it feels like now people are like, hey, we got a problem, how are we gonna fix it? And so personally, because of where I am in my career, I'm pivoting to how are we gonna fix it? And I'm doing a lot of this community engaged work, like that service learning class I talked about. But I'm also doing my research on like how best to do that community engaged work so that we have a real impact. And I'm doing less of the ice core stuff personally. Great question.
First of all, thank you for your talk and inspiring us and making us hopeful today. But second, you had a slide that indicated that the amount of wind power in Texas was expected to double in 2025. Did that happen? Do you happen to know?
So that was, yeah. So Texas has like 120 terawatts. They're literally, it's really interesting to know like, how did they get there? Like they saw the writing on the wall and installed these really high capacity power lines out to West Texas where they knew there was tons of wind and lots of open ranching space where the ranchers can actually get paid to have wind power under, above their ranching fields. Did it actually hit that number? I'm not sure, but I will tell you that when like these changes in wind power in Texas and in Iowa now over 60% of their grid power is from wind. They are, despite some of the headwind pressures that we are seeing at the federal level. I really worry about wind power, frankly, off the coast of New England because it's so hard to get that stuff permitted and so many of those permits have been pulled back. And it takes a long time to do that. But here in the windy central part of the country, like wind is booming.
All right, thanks for talking. Some of the biggest carbon emitters we have are these billion dollar companies, industries. And other than a carbon tax, which I don't think is going to happen in this country anytime soon, what are some things that we can do as a country to help, this idea of consumption and all these companies using carbon?
Yeah, it's really interesting how there was this concept of the carbon footprint, right? Which really put it all on us as individuals. It was like, hey, the companies, don't look at the companies. It's up to you to change your behavior. And I think there's been, at least I'll just say from my own personal understanding, I've been really focused on my own carbon footprint, and my wife and I, every year, we make decisions about how we're gonna try and reduce it. I mean, one thing I'll tell you, my students will tell you, I don't go to a lot of conferences anymore. Because when I did my carbon footprint, I realized that air travel was a huge part of my personal carbon footprint. So I made a conscious decision. I'm gonna not go to as many climate conferences. I'm not gonna go burn a bunch of carbon to talk with my colleagues about how we have to reduce the amount of carbon we burn. I made an exception for you all, honestly. I mean that completely honestly. I'm very selective about, we just had our huge conference in New Orleans just 2 months ago, and I didn't go. because I knew I wanted to come here and use that carbon. How do we deal with the large companies is a great question. I don't have an awesome answer to, but I do think acknowledging that the narrative that like it's all on you individually with your carbon footprint is not the right way to think about it. We do have to be like, yeah, but no, it's really on you. You gotta help out too. So it's probably a both and kind of situation. We can, as individuals, think about how we can reduce our emissions, but we also need to expect that of the companies that we buy from, that we consume from. And we probably need to think pretty hard about our overall culture of consumption.
I can nail it. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. You mentioned the NSF, and there's been major cuts to funding.
Yeah.
How are you building funding related to?
So Dartmouth is, to put it bluntly, really rich. I mean, I'm really blessed to be at an institution, and I've spent a lot of my education at institutions that were not, so I know the difference. And I've got close colleagues who aren't in such a fortunate position. So I'll put myself aside, because Dartmouth is able to roll with a lot of this stuff. I'll put it this way, we're hopeful in the science world, because the extreme cuts that were proposed by the administration last year were not what Congress eventually is considering, okay? So those like 50 to 60% cuts to NSF, that's not where Congress is. Congress basically ended up going for like status quo, no cuts. I do have concerns though. I've got friends who were at NSF as program managers who were fired. And so they fired a whole lot of people, and I worry that even if they have a bunch of money, they don't actually have the people power to like get that money out the door. But I remain hopeful. Because they've done a really remarkable job so far under very difficult conditions. Yes, there's a microphone here.
One of the things you said is that we have doers all over, right? And so I have an 8th grade daughter who's extremely passionate about environmental science, and students that are. So has anyone thought about doing a conference like this for kids so that we can start finding those people and start inspiring them, because they come up with some amazing ideas, and if they were sitting here with us, even just some of this presentation, they would take off.
Yeah, I love it. Let's do it. No, I'm kidding. That's a fabulous idea.
Eric, I can just reflect on that a little bit. 2 years ago at the conference, Frank Leopold, who was one of our keynote speakers, challenged the people organizing it to get kids involved, and that resulted in yesterday's Project 2100 conference at the Morton Arboretum for about 70 kids. So that was our first step in that direction to address exactly what you asked about. And Jeff Grant, I don't know how, but he's already talking about next year with Project 2100. So, you know, if you're a science teacher next year when those things come out, maybe look for that from Jeff, and it'll be a way to get your kids involved.
So once again, our organizers are ahead of the curve, right? They've already planted these seeds, and we've got some amazing progress already, and let's double down on that. Yeah.
Thanks. Following this talk, having one of my favorite books, Physics of Capitalism, and one of the chapters in this book goes into
renewable energy resources, like what you were explaining in your presentation. And one of the insights from this chapter from a scholar, Benjamin Sovacool, states that transitions to newer, cleaner energy systems, such as sources of renewable electricity or electric vehicles, often require significant shifts, not only in technology, but in political regulations, tariffs, and pricing regimes. And so I was just curious on your opinion, like on this, from your work. Do you think that, for example, the electric vehicle part of this presentation seems to be a really good solution for our day-to-day transportation, for our current infrastructure, specifically in the United States, but do you, in your opinion, advocate for other infrastructure transitions, like to more public transportation, electrified public transportation? Do you have any insights on
Yeah,
that?
and I think, you know, what we do in the community work is it has to be the community that converges around whatever solution works for them. So in the little towns in New England where I live, what we're talking about is densifying the downtowns so that they're more walkable and more bikeable, right? Bringing more housing. So right now we've got sort of not really dense, but we've got slightly more dense downtown centers, and then really like woodsy, open outskirts. And those woods, like people are buying parcels and they're building houses and they're taking down trees to do that. And it's like, no, let's keep those wild. Let's keep that forest intact. That helps with the carbon, that helps with the biodiversity. And let's keep people together in the center so that they can walk and bike, or we can have more efficient public transportation. We actually have a little public transportation bus system in our little community. I love that you said, EVs work for us in the United States. You go to a place like India, you go to Southeast Asia, like EVs are probably not the answer. It's probably more like electric scooters, right? Electric bikes. Like that's a huge thing that's happening there. That's very different from what's happening in Western Europe or the United States. Western Europe, all in on public transportation. We know there are challenges here in the United States with that because we're so spread out. But again, like each community needs to kind of figure out, and when I say community, I use that really broadly. Like it could be a small group, but it could be also on the sort of national scale. Like what works for us? Doesn't have to be the same answer everywhere.
All right, we have time for one more question over in the back.
Thank you. Back to the new renewable energy that's being online. What's China doing differently that's allowing them to online such a huge amount of new renewable compared to the rest of the world? Policy, industry, technology perspectives.
So I do not pretend or play on TV a China expert, so take this with a complete truckload of salt. But my sense is that this is one of the side benefits of what overall is a really awful authoritarian governance system. The government decided they want to do this, so they just do it, right? They don't need Congress to act. They don't need buy-in. Like, you're doing this. We're doing this. And I think they need it in order to, I think it started out for them, again, I'm kind of out on a limb here, but my sense has been that they did this almost out of necessity. Like they couldn't build enough coal-fired power plants and everything to deal with it. All the energy they needed to get their society to increasingly modernize. And then they had this sort of air pollution crisis. If you remember the Beijing Olympics, right? They had to stop everything for 2 weeks just so that the athletes could breathe. That was the beginning of the public actually pushing back and being like, this is not okay. Right? We did the clean air back in 1970, and it worked. Just one last little vignette here. I'm out on the Boston Harbor on a boat with my dad, and we're looking back at Boston, and there's this cloud of smog. And I said, oh, it's so beautiful, but it kind of depresses me to see the smog over the city. And he says, Eric, that's not smog, that's fog. And I said, no, Dad, I do this for a living. That's smog. And he said, no, I know that's fog because it's been there my whole life. And he's 81. And I said, do you know, Dad, that the air is way cleaner now than when you were a kid and when you were 30, 40. Like the air is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner because of things like the Clean Air Act. And he had no idea. He assumed that air pollution was just getting worse. And if that was there his whole life, then it must be natural. Right? So people have these really interesting perceptions, but I think China, they're just they're all in and they can just mobilize because of the people power and the authoritarian government combined. They can be super efficient. Can I just make one last thing of hope here for you all? I meant to, and I forgot to mention, on that slide that showed that we're probably doing better than you fear, it is possible that 2026 will be the global peak in carbon emissions. The global peak in carbon emissions. And if it's not this year, it's going to be one of the next few years. Okay, so US has been going down since 07, Europe since 79. Globally, our emissions are right about at peak. In the next couple of years, we're going to start going down. That is hopeful. That is real hope. We are not on this runaway train. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all.